I first crossed paths with my wife, whom I'll refer to as Sue, when we both stepped into the bustling world of college at just 18 years old. There was an undeniable chemistry between us from the moment we embarked on our first date. I can still remember the butterflies in my stomach as we shared our dreams and fears over a casual meal, each moment more electric than the last. It wasn't long before we found ourselves declaring our love for one another, our words spilling out in a rush of youthful passion. I was thrilled that Sue had pursued me. It made me feel wanted in a way I had never experienced before. Our connection deepened as we navigated the ups and downs of college life together. We were each other's confidants, unearthing our deepest insecurities and secrets. It was during her senior year, however, that our bond was truly tested. Sue's father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, a brutal disease that would change the course of our lives. When he was hospitalized, I made it my mission to be her rock. I spent countless nights in that sterile hospital room, holding her hand and providing comfort in her darkest moments. The pain she endured was palpable, but together we faced it head-on, and I believe it was during this time that our relationship solidified. She often told me that she wouldn't have made it through without my support, calling me her soulmate. After we graduated, I knew I wanted to spend my life with Sue. 2 years later, I proposed, and it felt like everything was falling into place. I had married the love of my life, secured a well-paying job, and we had the full backing of both our families. But as life often does, it threw us a curveball. My best friend, whom I'll call Dave, was an integral part of my life. We shared a brotherly bond, one that I thought was unbreakable. We'd known each other since the 3rd grade, and I considered him the sibling I never had. But tragedy struck when Dave's wife died in a horrific car accident about a year ago. The loss shattered him. After her passing, he returned to our hometown, but he was a ghost of the vibrant person I once knew. I tried to reach out, to pull him from his spiral of grief, but he shut everyone out, isolating himself in his pain. Realizing that Sue had also faced a devastating loss, I thought maybe she could connect with Dave on a level that I couldn't, given her own experiences. I asked her to check in on him, believing that some companionship would aid his healing. Looking back, I can see now that this was a massive misstep, one that would unravel the fabric of our marriage. At first, I was encouraged by their interactions. Sue began visiting Dave daily, spending hours at his house even when I wasn't there. They hiked together, watched movies, and shared meals, activities that should have included me, but instead became their secret rendezvous. As time passed, it became apparent that their friendship was far more intimate than I had intended. I felt a growing unease but pushed it aside, convincing myself that this was what Dave needed. It's crucial to note that prior to this tragedy, Sue and Dave had never gotten along. Sue had always viewed him as a morally ambiguous character, especially since he had a history of cheating on his late wife. Her disdain for him had been evident from the start. She often questioned my friendship with someone she considered so ethically flawed. Ironically, it was this very disdain that rendered me blind to the brewing storm. Before long, Sue began to incorporate Dave into our plans, inviting him to events meant for just the two of us. This shift was disheartening. I noticed her behavior changing. She became increasingly distant, always glued to her phone, and often returning home late. The signs were glaringly obvious. One day, while she was texting, I mustered the courage to ask who she was talking to. She casually replied it was just one of her girlfriends. When I asked to see the messages, her irritation flared, and she accused me of being possessive. As the suspicions mounted, I turned to Dave for reassurance. I confided in him about my discomfort, hoping he would understand. Instead, he brushed me off, insisting nothing inappropriate was happening and even accused me of not trusting him or my own wife. I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. It was like being in a surreal nightmare, with my instincts twisted into something sinister by the very people I thought I could trust. The more I scrutinized their relationship, the more the pieces fell into place. I started connecting dots that revealed a chilling narrative, one where my wife was becoming someone I hardly recognized. My suspicions turned into a palpable dread, and I knew I had to confront the reality of the situation. One evening, while trying to collect my thoughts, I found myself reflecting on how I had gotten to this point. The laughter and warmth we once shared seemed to have been replaced with distance and deceit. Sue's late-night outings became more frequent, and the conversations we used to have dwindled into awkward exchanges filled with unspoken tension. I was at a crossroads, feeling the weight of the betrayal hang heavy in the air. It was clear that something had to change. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when the foundation of my marriage was crumbling beneath me. I decided that I had to confront Sue, to lay everything bare and seek the truth. I knew it wouldn't be easy, and the thought of it filled me with dread, but I couldn't stand idly by any longer. I owed it to myself, and to the love we once had, to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As I steeled myself for the confrontation, I felt a mix of determination and heartbreak. I needed to know what had been going on behind my back, to understand how things had spiraled so far out of control. This was the moment that would either make or break us, and I was prepared to face whatever truths awaited me, hoping to reclaim the love and trust that seemed so far out of reach. This tumultuous journey began on a seemingly ordinary day when Sue came to me with a troubled look etched across her face. "I'm going to visit my sister for the weekend," she said, her voice laced with a mix of frustration and resignation. "I just need some space. You've been driving me crazy with your accusations." Those words cut deep, echoing in my mind long after she left. As the hours ticked away, a gnawing suspicion gripped me. I decided to call her sister to confirm whether Sue had indeed arrived for the visit. Her sister answered the phone, and while she confirmed that Sue was expected, she added a detail that sent a chill down my spine: "She hasn't arrived yet." Sue had left around 3 p.m., and it was now nearing 10 p.m. The distance to her sister's place was about 4 hours away. Something felt off. Compelled by an instinct I couldn't ignore, I decided to check on my friend Dave. Maybe it was a wild hunch, but something pushed me to do it. As I pulled into his driveway, my heart sank. There, parked a few feet away from his house, was Sue's car. A wave of realization crashed over me, and in that moment, the truth became painfully clear. I hate to admit it, but tears streamed down my face as I processed the reality of what I was witnessing. With my heart racing, I decided to confront the situation head-on. I slipped into the house through the back door, a move I knew would be open. The air felt thick with tension as I crept toward the bedroom, and then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of Sue moaning. My stomach twisted in knots as I approached the bedroom door. I took a deep breath and peered through the crack, and what I saw would haunt me forever. There was Sue, bent over on the nightstand, with Dave behind her. My world shattered in that instant. I pushed the door wide open, and the sight froze both of them in their tracks. Time stood still. They turned to face me, shock and guilt written across their faces. Anger surged within me, boiling over like a raging storm. Every ounce of my being screamed to confront Dave, to unleash my fury upon him, but a part of me knew that wasn't the answer. I felt utterly broken, so instead, I simply turned away and walked out. As I got into my car, I could hear them scrambling behind me, Sue's voice cutting through the chaos, pleading, "Stop. I can explain." But I couldn't bear to look at her. I didn't know what I would say or do, so I just drove away, the tears flowing freely. The drive home was a blur, filled with sorrow and despair. I felt completely hollow inside, and as I made my way back, my phone buzzed incessantly with calls from both Sue and Dave. I ignored them, choosing instead to seek refuge with a college friend, crashing at his place for the next week. My heart ached, and I found it impossible to eat or sleep, my mind racing with thoughts of betrayal. I eventually informed my employer of my situation, and they graciously offered me some time off to process everything. Still, my phone continued to ring, messages flooding in from both families, desperate for updates. I assured my family that I was all right and would return soon, but I couldn't bring myself to respond to anyone else. The pain was too raw, too unbearable. I felt like I was drowning in an ocean of heartache. Thoughts of ending it all crossed my mind. I wanted to escape the unbearable agony that had engulfed my life. But despite the despair, I wasn't brave enough to take that final step. I wished I could be stronger, but my resolve was wavering with each passing moment. How could someone I had loved so selflessly betray me so cruelly? I was lost, desperately searching for a way to cope with the whirlwind of emotions crashing over me. In a moment of desperation, I turned to the online community for guidance, pleading for help. I poured my heart out, sharing the depths of my anguish. The responses were a mix of sympathy and tough love. "You need to move on," some said. "There's someone out there who will love you for the rest of your life. Don't look back, look forward. What's done is done and cannot be fixed." Their words echoed in my mind, a reminder that there was still hope amid the pain. As I began to reflect on my marriage, I was overwhelmed by a flood of memories. Most of it was filled with joy, laughter, and the promise of a future together. This is why I had fought so hard to find a reason to stay. Yet, the more I thought about Sue's betrayal, the more rage bubbled up within me. I recalled the times she had become defensive when I questioned her late nights or her vague excuses. The anger she directed at me was a mask for the truth she was hiding. How could I have been so blind to the signs? Each memory of her deception only fueled my fury, and I realized that the moments I had cherished were now overshadowed by a painful reality. The deeper I delved into those memories, the angrier I became. I would never forget the disgust I felt when I remembered how she gaslighted me, making me doubt my sanity with her lies. How could I have loved someone who treated me like this? I had given everything to her, and yet, she had chosen betrayal instead. I felt a shift within myself. Yes, the journey ahead would be fraught with challenges, but I knew I had to reclaim my life and find a way to heal. It was time to focus on rebuilding myself, to learn how to let go of what was lost, and to embrace the uncertain future that lay ahead. With each passing day, I understood that the strength to move forward resided within me. I began to surround myself with friends and family who cared for me, and slowly, I started to rebuild my shattered world. While the scars of betrayal would remain, I realized that I could learn to trust again, not just others but also myself. The path to healing would be long and winding, but I was determined to walk it. I would take it one step at a time, learning to forgive not just Sue and Dave, but also myself for allowing their betrayal to hurt me so deeply. And in that journey, I hoped to find peace once more, embracing the possibilities of tomorrow with an open heart. When I finally gathered the courage to confront Dave, my best friend, about the whispers that had haunted me for weeks, my heart raced with a mixture of anger and fear. I wanted to know, man to man, if there was something going on between him and my wife, Sue. The thought alone twisted my gut. I could handle the fact that my marriage was crumbling, but to discover it was with the person I trusted the most? That was a betrayal I wasn't sure I could survive. The memory of that moment is seared into my mind. The conversation was heavy with an unbearable weight. The initial revelation hit me like a freight train, leaving me breathless and reeling. Cheating was bad enough, but the gaslighting that followed was an insidious poison that seeped into my thoughts. It took a special kind of person to lie so effortlessly, to turn their emotions off like a light switch. As I faced Dave, I felt like a fool, played like a pawn in their cruel game. I remember one night, just 2 days before everything came crashing down. Sue came home late, her cheeks flushed, her eyes sparkling with an intensity that made my heart race. "I love you so much," she said, wrapping her arms around me. She went on about how she couldn't stop thinking about me on her drive home, how much she craved me. In that moment, I felt adored. But deep down, I couldn't shake the nagging suspicion that she had just come from Dave's place. The truth hung heavy in the air, and the evidence was undeniable: she wasn't wearing any panties. That night, I kissed her, completely oblivious to the reality that I was her second choice. The thought sent waves of nausea through me. How could I have been so blind? This whole situation made me feel like less of a man. The weight of betrayal settled on my shoulders, suffocating me. I couldn't believe I had let them walk all over me like that. The more I reflected on it, the stronger the urge became to storm over to Dave's house and confront him, to demand answers. But I stopped myself. I knew that there was no justice for me in this twisted scenario. The legal system was a minefield, and if I retaliated, I'd be the one left holding the bag, facing consequences I didn't deserve. My lawyer had urged me to keep my cool, reminding me that any rash actions could jeopardize my chances in the impending divorce proceedings. "Think about the long game," she advised, her voice steady and calm. She even suggested I see a therapist, but I was adamant that I didn't need one. I was determined to navigate this storm on my own, despite the chaos swirling around me. But the emails from Sue kept flooding in, each one more infuriating than the last. Her words were laden with the same tired nonsense, the same pleas about how miserable her life would be without me. It was almost comical when she had the audacity to send me Bible verses about forgiveness. If I mattered that much to her, why had she done this to me? To keep my sanity intact, I returned to work. Throwing myself into my job became my lifeline, a distraction that kept my mind from spiraling into despair. I noticed I wasn't drinking as much as I had been in the beginning, which was a small victory. But then, one day at the office, I received a letter from Sue. At first, I wanted to toss it aside without a second thought, but something compelled me to read it. In the letter, she poured her heart out, explaining her individual counseling sessions and how they had unearthed some of her deep-seated issues. The biggest revelation? Low self-esteem. She wrote about how the disparity in our physical appearances made her feel insecure, how she longed for validation from someone other than me. Even though she knew I found her attractive, deep down, she felt like she needed that affirmation from someone else to feel worthy. Sue's confession cut deep. She talked about her sister, who had always been prettier than her, and how that comparison had eroded her self-worth over the years. She said that while she appreciated my love and support, she had sought validation outside our marriage. She apologized again, insisting that it wasn't an excuse but an attempt to explain her actions. Then came the kicker. She suggested we try marriage counseling to work things out. But by this point, I had already chosen to ignore her messages and her family's attempts to reach out. I was done. I had my mind set on the divorce. The first order of business was to untangle our finances, a daunting task that loomed over me like a dark cloud. We had separate accounts, but also a joint savings account that felt like a noose tightening around my neck. Even though I made significantly more than Sue and had contributed most of the funds in that account, I couldn't simply take what I was entitled to without her consent. It was maddening, this sense of entrapment. I felt like a prisoner in my own life. As I navigated this tumultuous path, I realized that the fight wasn't just about money or betrayal, it was about reclaiming my identity and my sense of self-worth. I wasn't just a victim of their betrayal, I was determined to rise from the ashes of this heartbreak, to build a new life where I could finally breathe without the weight of deceit hanging over me. The road ahead would be tough, but I was ready to face it head-on, fueled by the desire to reclaim my life and my dignity. The prospect of splitting everything 50-50 loomed over me like a dark cloud. After weighing my options, I made the decision to file for divorce. A few weeks later, Jane was served, and with that, the real drama began. It was the very same day she received the divorce papers that she showed up at my apartment, a divorce petition clutched tightly in her hands. How she found me, I still couldn't fathom. As soon as I saw her, time seemed to freeze. We stood there in a taut silence that felt like an eternity, both of us lost in the echo of our shared history. All the hurt and betrayal from that fateful night washed over me like a tidal wave, stirring emotions I thought I had buried deep. I fought back the tears that threatened to spill, unwilling to show any sign of weakness. Jane looked disheveled, as if she had been crying for hours. Without warning, she lunged toward me, arms outstretched for a hug, but instinct kicked in, and I gently pushed her away. That small gesture sent her into a frenzy. She became hysterical, shouting, "Why are you giving up on us so easily? Can't we just talk this out?" At that moment, I realized that I needed to put distance between us. Just looking at her sparked a storm of conflicting emotions inside me. I felt suffocated by the memories, by the love that had turned into bitterness. I turned on my heel and headed back to my car, but she wasn't having it. She threw herself onto the hood, her voice trembling with desperation. "I just want to talk," she insisted, her eyes pleading with me to reconsider. "We can't end things like this. We owe it to ourselves to at least clear the air." Reluctantly, I agreed, knowing full well that she wouldn't take no for an answer. The scene was escalating, and I didn't want to draw unwanted attention from our neighbors. We retreated to the safety of my apartment, and I plopped down on the couch, bracing myself for whatever was about to unfold. Jane took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts. "I'll do anything to save our marriage," she declared, her voice shaking but resolute. "I don't love Dave. I'm so sorry." Then, as if rehearsed, she launched into a plan. "I did some research on how we can move forward. I think a trial separation might help. During that time, you could date whoever you want, but I want you to hold off on the divorce. Just give me a chance to mend our friendship first, and then we can work on our marriage." The absurdity of her suggestions hit me like a brick. She rambled on about open relationships, citing couples who had survived infidelity, and even proposed we pack our bags and move somewhere new, just the two of us. That idea stung deeply, piercing through the fog of confusion. We had talked about a future together not long before everything unraveled, and now she was throwing around ideas as if we were two strangers. When she finally finished, the room fell into silence again. We exchanged glances, the weight of our history hanging heavily between us. I couldn't hold back my questions any longer. "Why, Jane? Why him? Why cheat on me with him, only to come back when I caught you?" As the words left my mouth, she broke down sobbing. Her tears flowed freely, and she confessed that guilt had consumed her even during the affair. "I was so wrapped up in it that I didn't think about what I was losing," she cried. "I was too far gone to stop, and I never considered the consequences." My heart sank further as she spoke. "Counseling made me realize something," she continued, her voice trembling. "If it hadn't been with Dave, I would have likely cheated on you with someone else. There were underlying issues I didn't even know I had." Desperation clung to me as I sought reassurance. "Do you love Dave?" I asked, feeling like I was standing at the edge of a precipice. She assured me she didn't, that they hadn't spoken since I left, and that he was now just a fleeting shadow in her past. "I only love you," she pleaded, "and I'll do anything to make this right." But my mind wouldn't let go of the past. "Have you ever cheated on me before this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. With tears still staining her cheeks, she swore on her father's memory that this was the first and last time. Her promises echoed in the room, but a heavy doubt lingered in my heart. Could I ever trust her again? The love we once shared felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by betrayal and heartbreak. The silence grew thick, wrapping around us like a fog, as I struggled to process everything she had said. As Jane sat there, her face a mix of regret and hope, I was left to grapple with the reality of our shattered relationship. The choices we had made, the love we had lost, it all felt like a cruel joke. I needed to find my own way forward, but as I looked into her eyes, I knew that the road ahead would be anything but easy. I asked her who else knew about her and Dave, and there was a brief pause before she replied. She hesitated, biting her lip as if the answer was a weight she could barely carry. Finally, she admitted that only her sister knew, and that revelation had come just a few days before I discovered everything. She mentioned that her sister had urged her to end the affair and come clean to me. I couldn't help but feel a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could she have let it go on for so long? I pressed her further, wondering why she was begging me to stay when it seemed so easy to just leave and be with Dave. Is this all because you feel it's the right thing to do, or do you actually want to be with me? I challenged her. She looked down, tears glistening in her eyes, and finally responded, I'm doing this because I love you. I know I've made terrible choices, and I want to make things right. We talked for hours, with her crying openly while I remained stoic. I had shed enough tears when I first found out about the affair, and I didn't have any left for this moment. The weight of her words hung in the air, and I felt both heavy and numb. Then, after a long silence, I asked her if there was anything else she wanted to tell me, any other secrets she was hiding. The moment I said it, her face twisted with distress. She begged me not to get angry, and that made my heart race. I could feel my stomach knotting up as I braced myself for whatever news was about to come. She began sobbing again, and I urged her to just spit it out. The anticipation was making me uneasy. When the truth finally spilled out, it hit me like a punch to the gut. She revealed that she had discovered she was pregnant shortly after I left and had gone through with an abortion because she wasn't sure who the father was. She explained that if it turned out to be Dave's, there would be no hope for us, and she felt she had to make that choice. I was in disbelief, my mind racing. I felt paralyzed by shock, and as she pleaded with me not to end our relationship, I felt my heart go cold. I had reached a breaking point. I need you to leave, I said, my voice flat and devoid of emotion. She begged me to stay, to keep talking, but the desperation in her pleas only fueled my anger. I asked how far along she had been when she found out, and she answered that it had only been a few weeks. Suddenly, a thought struck me. Wait a minute, I said, you mentioned in your email that you only started sleeping with Dave about a week before I found out. Was that a lie? She nodded. Just like that, she confirmed my worst fears. She explained that she had downplayed the timeline to protect me from the truth, trying to minimize the hurt. Her confession was brutal. She admitted that her relationship with Dave had only been physical for less than a month. She tried to reach out to me, to console me, but I pushed her away. I can't do this anymore, I said firmly. You need to leave. Now. She began to protest, but I was done. I shouted at her to get out of my life. Can we talk again once you've had time to process everything? She asked, but I shook my head. I had made my decision. I told her I'd found a job in another state and planned to move as soon as the divorce was underway. In our state, there was a 2-month cooling-off period after filing, but I was ready to go. I had already notified my boss, and my plans were set. When she heard this, her cries intensified, the same desperate pleading echoing in my ears. I told her again to leave, threatening to call the police if she didn't. Reluctantly, she walked out, and I collapsed onto the floor, utterly defeated. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, wondering how everything had spiraled so far so quickly. How had my marriage reached this point in such a short time? The questions tormented me, and I felt an overwhelming sense of loss. Before this conversation, I had been leaning toward divorce, but now, after everything we had discussed, I was more certain than ever. I had to move on, for my own sake, even if it felt like my world was shattering around me. The clarity in my decision was both a relief and a source of deep sorrow, but I knew it was the only way forward. I had been resolute in ignoring all of Sue's attempts to reach out. But just a few days ago, on a Thursday that felt like any other, I received a shocking phone call from my mom. Sue was in the hospital. My heart dropped when I heard the words drug overdose. It felt like a surreal nightmare, one I couldn't quite grasp. Why was this happening? How had everything spiraled so out of control? I rushed to the hospital, my mind racing with a mixture of emotions. When I arrived, I found Sue in a psych ward. She appeared to be stable, but seeing her in that state was gut-wrenching. I couldn't shake the feelings of hurt and confusion as I sat by her side, watching her sleep. Despite everything, I still loved her, and the overwhelming sense of relief that she was okay was tempered by a deep sadness. How had we reached this point? The thoughts of divorce, which had been swirling around in my mind, were momentarily pushed aside by the gravity of the situation. I found myself grappling with a whirlwind of emotions, unsure of how to move forward. The complexity of our history, filled with both love and pain, clouded my judgment. There were so many crucial details I felt I was leaving out, but I worried that adding them would only complicate things further. I needed to figure out my next steps, but clarity eluded me. As I sat there, I couldn't help but wonder about the motivations behind Sue's actions. Some comments from friends echoed in my mind, suggesting that perhaps the overdose was an intentional cry for help, a last-ditch effort to get my attention. They urged me to proceed with the divorce and seek counseling for my own well-being. Their words echoed the harsh reality I was beginning to accept. I couldn't allow anyone to guilt-trip me into forgiving her. Many voices chimed in with their advice. Focus on cutting ties and healing, they said. You deserve to find someone who loves you as you should be loved. The sentiment was overwhelmingly clear. I needed to prioritize my own well-being. The consensus was that I could never trust Sue again. After everything she had put me through, how could I? They cautioned me that no matter how hard it was, I needed to move on, to save myself from this toxic relationship. A chorus of voices urged me to stick to my plans for divorce, to keep my distance from her. They warned me that she might try to guilt me into taking her back, and they were right. I needed to make it clear that her actions weren't my responsibility. She had made her choices, poor ones, and it was time for me to reclaim my life. They reminded me that I should only see her when lawyers were present and to have someone else around when she needed to retrieve her belongings. The thought of confronting her again filled me with dread, but it also gave me a sense of determination. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into her chaos. She had betrayed me with my best friend, and the idea of reconciliation felt like a cruel joke. As I absorbed their advice, it struck me how much I needed to focus on myself. Sue's decisions, her affair, and her subsequent actions were no longer my burden to bear. I was on the right path by choosing to divorce her. I had to remind myself that what she and my best mate did was unforgivable. They had both lied to my face and created a betrayal that ran deep. It was a nightmare that no amount of marriage counseling could possibly mend. And then there was the weight of the knowledge that Sue's actions could have endangered our unborn child. That realization was a chilling reminder that there was no going back. I needed to stay strong for myself and focus on moving forward. This chapter of my life, filled with heartbreak and betrayal, had to come to an end. With every word of advice from friends ringing in my ears, I began to feel a sense of empowerment. I knew I needed to take the next step, to file for divorce, to start fresh, and to find my own way again. I would not allow anyone to pull me back into that cycle of pain. This was my opportunity to break free, to reclaim my life, and to seek happiness on my own terms. And so, with a heavy heart but newfound resolve, I set my sights on the future, ready to navigate the uncertain road ahead.